of Margaret Quilting, or Miss Marker's Quilts. And today I'm going to share with you a jelly roll quilt, or a 1600 quilt, or a jelly roll race quilt. Try to say that 15 times. Anyhow, I have a couple of baby showers coming up, and I really wanted to give a great utility quilt to the baby. To me, baby quilts are supposed to be thrown on the floor, thrown in the grass, so that you can have a picnic on them and just to overall play with. To me, quilts are part of my everyday life, and I like to use my quilts. So I decided that I would make these jelly roll quilts for these baby showers, but I wanted to give them a little bit of a change up. So what I have done, and I'm going to show you the quilt, I'll put a still photograph in also for you so that you can see a little bit more of the quilt. But this is the quilt, and it's made out of a line from Moda called Bartholomew's Reef. And you can see in this quilt I've done something a little bit different. I've stuck these rectangles in there. I just wanted to break it up a little bit and do something a little different. So that was the first thing I did. The second thing I did different with this quilt that I've never done before with a jelly roll quilt is I literally took each fabric as they come off the roll. So I didn't do any sorting ahead of time. I just took the quilt and added my rectangles to it, pressed it, and just kept quilting it. So that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. I wanted to also show you how I do a continuous sewing. I use what my mom called and taught me. They're called plugs. Some people call them starters and enders, but it helps to catch my threads. So I just continuously sew, and I'll show you what that's all about. And I'm going to show you how I go about pressing. To me, pressing is really important. It helps your quilt to lay flat. It helps you to know that you're sewing straight. And I like to press as I go, because then when I'm done with the quilt, I just need to do one good press all over it, and I'm done. I can take it down and put it on the longer. So to get started, I'm going to show you how I made the rectangles. See if I can show them to you again. Show you how I made these rectangles. Then I'm going to show you how I attached them to the strips and how I sewed the whole quilt. So I will change the camera angle so that you can see exactly what it is that I'm going to do. All right, so I have cut 5 in total, 2.5 inch strips by the width of the fabric. And now what I'm going to do is cut these down so that I can add them to the end of each strip in my jelly roll. So I'm going to very carefully line it up on this little rotating cutting mat, and I've lined up both ends. You can see I've hung it over a little bit, because what I want to do is I want to get rid of this selvage. I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm just going to line it up. And where I'm lining up is I'm lining up on this line, putting my ruler right next to right on this yellow line so I can see it. And then I'm also lining up the straight of the fabric onto here. So where I had cut the strips is being lined up there so that I can get a nice square. I'm going to trim that off, and then I'm going to rotate my mat. Now this is where you decide exactly how big you want your rectangles to be. So I've decided I want mine to be about 4 1/4. I want them just over 4. Well, to make a strip that's right around 4 inches, or about 4 1/4, I need to add a 1/2 inch, because I'm going to be sewing on 2 ends. So I'm going to cut these actually 4 3/4 each. So I'm going to rotate my ruler. This is a Creative Grids So my white numbers are my whole, my black numbers are my half, my black dots. So it's really easy for me just by glancing at it to know where I am. So I'm measuring on the whole numbers, and I said I want it to be about 4 3/4. So here's my 4 3/4 line, but I do need to line up some reference point across the fabric itself so that I can make sure I'm cutting it straight. So I can see right here, this is straight. And then I also can look down here at this reference point to make sure I'm straight, and there. So I'm checking at 3 different points to make certain that I'm nice and square. So I'm going to cut it here. I'll lift my ruler carefully and then remove these. Whoop. Lift my care and remove it. And now I'm going to make sure that it didn't change anything. It didn't seem to. And I'm going to, again, measure 4 3/4. And then I'm going to line up one straight line there and another straight line here to make certain that I'm nice and square. And I'm going to cut this off. Now this piece I'm going to save, because to me, this little piece of blue fabric is an absolute perfect plug for my sewing machine. And I'll show you now what a plug actually is and why I use one. So now I'm going to show you how I go about chain piecing or continuous piecing my Jelly Roll quilt. I've got all of my fabrics. These are all 2.5 inches by the width of the fabric, and they're in the exact order that they were in the Jelly Roll. I just unrolled them. I did trim the selvage off the end, so all the selvage is gone. So I'm going to set those to my left, and then to my right is an entire stack of my 2.5 by 4 3/4 inch rectangles. So I'm going to put those to my right, and what I'm going to do is just start by grabbing the end of one of the Jelly Roll strips. I'm going to add my rectangle to it. I do have my walking foot on. It is absolutely not necessary. The reason why I have my walking foot on is because I've been attaching bindings. And whenever I attach bindings, I always do use my walking foot. And I just haven't taken it off yet. So I am going to just go ahead and leave that on. I have a little mark right here on my walking foot that says that that's 1/4 inch. And I'm going to be in needle down position, which you can see I am. And this is the plug that I was telling you about. I always leave this little piece of fabric in my sewing machine. And the reason why I do, as I'll show you, is when I go to sew my next piece, if I've got this plug, as I call it, all ready to go, I don't tend to get my threads gunked up in the bottom of my bobbin case. So it helps to keep my threads in a continuous sewing, and I also don't waste thread. My favorite thread, as most of you know, is Aurifil. Aurifil is not an inexpensive thread, but it is a great, high quality, very fine thread. So I do like to be careful with it and just not waste it. So I have gotten things started, and I'm just going to start sewing. I'm just going to stick my corner underneath there, and off I go. Once I got close to the edge, I grab my next piece of fabric, and I attach my next piece. And I'm just going to line it up, and then I'm going to sew. So we've got 39 more to go. Okay, so now here comes where my next plug comes in. I'm just going to take this and I'm going to keep right on sewing onto it. And then I can easily reach around behind and snip off the very last piece. The next thing that I'm going to do, because I really want to keep it in order, is I'm just going to snip. See, all of my pieces are connected. I think you can see them. They're all connected. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate them. But when I separate them, I'm going to keep them in the same order that they're in. So as soon as I've got them all clipped apart and in the order, I will come back and show you how I go about attaching them all together for the one great big huge long jelly roll to my original stack with the stars on top. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'll start with this piece. And I'm going to attach all of them together so that I'm going to have one great big huge long strip of fabric. So I'm going to pick them off one at a time, starting. Here's my start. So I'll take that and put that one behind me. Here's my very first end that I need to attach my next piece to. I'm going to pull it out, line it up, and start sewing again. It'll take me, about 20 minutes to put it all together. And I'm just going to keep doing that. Just keep flipping that one over so I've got my right side. Put my right sides together. Make sure I'm lined up nice and straight. And sew away. This is where my jelly roll quilt differs from the normal. I've taken the end of my long strip, which is right here, and this was my very first strip. I'm going to bring the end up. I'm going to attach it to the very first one, and I'm going to sew the entire length of it together. So I'm just sewing the strips totally together. So I'm going to start. And this one's gonna take a while. I've brought my end up to the top, and I have sewn that the entire length, and it's quite a bit. I'll insert a picture of all of the fabric. And I'm going to first set my seam by pressing down, and I'm going to do that through for the entire strip. Then once I've done that, I'm going to come back to my end because this is a closed seam. And I'm just going to insert my scissors into the end and snip it open. Okay? Then I'm going to take it and put it back down on my pressing board. I'm going to lift up my end. And I'm just going to go down the entire length, and I'm going to press it nice and flat and open. And I'll do that for my entire strip. Okay, I first sewed an entire strip together. Then I brought the end up to meet with the start, and I sewed it together to create 2 strips. And now I've taken the 2 strips, brought up the end to the top, and I've sewn it together to give me 4 strips. Now, one of the things that I'm doing with this jelly roll quilt, which is different than what's normally done, is normally you cut the first 18 inches off to give it a little bit more of a stagger. But because I have put these blocks, these rectangles in, I'll bring up these rectangles in, I am not cutting the 18 inches off. I have pressed my seam closed, and now I'm going to press my seams open, and then I'm going to bring my end to my start again, and that will give me 8 rows. This is my 3rd time of sewing it end to end, and as I've done before, I have set my seam first, and then I've taken it and I have pressed my seam to one side. And I'm going to do my 4th time through. Here's my 4th time of sewing the strips together, and I now have 16 rows, and I'm about to do my final time of sewing them together. In a little over 3 hours, a jelly roll and probably about a half a yard of fabric, I now have a 64 by 59.5 inch quilt, all ready to take and put on the long arm and get it quilted. I'll let you know what it looks like when I get it all quilted. If you would like to see how I go about making the decision on how I'm going to quilt it, stay tuned, and I will be also showing that. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.